President Trump signed an executive order on Thursday barring Americans from investing in a group of companies that the White House says supports China's military. It applies to 31 firms identified by the Defense Department earlier this year as backed by the Chinese military. The list includes tech firms and large state-owned construction companies. In the order, President Trump accused China of, quote, increasingly exploiting U.S. investors to finance the development and modernization of its military. The ban is set to go into effect on January 11th. For more on all of this, let's bring in Isaac Stonefish. He's a CBSN contributor and a senior fellow at the Asia Society Center on U.S. Chinese Relations. Isaac, always good to have you. We've been talking at length in the past about the tenuous relationship that the U.S. and China seems to be having in the later part of the Trump administration. So how does this action further escalate these tensions?
It does it in a fairly large way, I would say. I think the Trump administration is trying to seed a series of actions that raise the stakes both in the U.S. China relationship and also make it more difficult for U.S. companies, U.S. individuals to be engaged in firms that have really deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party and to the party state. And this is a warning not just for investors in these particular companies, some of which are private, but to investors in other military-linked companies, other companies that are Chinese and doing things that the U.S. deems sensitive, and saying, hey, you should probably think twice before you invest in, say, this state-owned enterprise or that state-owned enterprise.
Well, tell us a little bit more about which companies will be impacted by this. Are they well-known ones? Will our viewers know them, or are they substantial but potentially not as well-known?
So for people who've been following the U.S.-China trade war, Huawei, the perennial favorite punching bag that is nominally private but has very deep links to the state, is on the list. There's a company called Hikvision, which is notorious for providing security cameras to concentration camps in northwest China. That's on the list. And then a holding company of China Mobile, which is one of the world's largest telecommunications firms, is also on the list as well. So they're not household names in the United States, but the investment community and the policy community, these are very familiar firms, and these are massive, massive companies.
As soon as you said companies that provide cameras to concentration camps, I think that people's thoughts about this may have, if not swung, become solidified, that this sounds like the right sort of thing that the President of the United States should be doing. Talk to us. Is this controversial in any way? And what kind of impact will this order have, not only on investors in the United States, but potentially in other countries? And if they're in fact providing support to concentration camps, shouldn't we all be celebrating this move?
So I think the problem is that the Trump administration, and certainly Trump himself, have been incredibly uneven in the way they push back against Beijing. And Trump himself even said a note of support to Chinese Chairman Xi Jinping about the concentration camps, which former National Security Advisor Bolton reported in his book. The other issue is that there's a really large swath of American society which likes to pretend that China and the Chinese Communist Party is just like every other government in the world and overlooks both the Leninist political system and also the massive human rights abuses that are taking place in Xinjiang, so the region in northwest China with the concentration camps. And I applaud the way that you framed it. I wish this were not controversial and this was just sort of a no-brainer that we don't support companies that do this, that we don't allow, say, major U.S. pension funds, we don't allow Harvard or Stanford or CalPERS, the California Pension Fund for Teachers. We don't allow them to invest in companies like this. But until now, and until January and November 2021, when this goes into play, companies, U.S. institutions can still invest in these companies.
Well, what has been the response from the Chinese government? Do you expect to see retaliation against this order?
It's hard to know if they're going to retaliate against this order specifically, if they're going to retaliate against another piece of the tensions. Beijing has been predictably pretty upset by this order, and they're also upset because Secretary of State Pompeo has made more comments that make it seem like he believes Taiwan is an independent nation, which Beijing vehemently disagrees with. So oftentimes when something like this happens, Beijing will not act in a way that makes it seem like it's directly related to this move, but will do something else. Will target a U.S. business for, say, a tax violation or another sort of violation, or they'll come up with a new rule that they try to justify in a different way to allow them some plausible deniability that it's not, in fact, retaliation, when a lot of times we just think, you guys are retaliating against this because of what we're doing to China Mobile, what we're doing to Huawei.
Well, President Trump has a little bit more than 2 months left in his presidency. In fact, the order is scheduled to go into effect a little bit more than a week before Inauguration Day. Why are we seeing the president take this action now? And do you expect to see him enact more measures on China before he leaves office?
I do. I think what this is members of his administration who want to solidify some of the guardrails that are being built up around U.S. companies and U.S. institutions' ability to engage with some of the more nefarious parts of the Chinese Communist Party. And I think there's a fear that when the Biden administration comes in, although they will focus a lot more on multilateralism, they'll bring Japan in, they'll bring South Korea in, it might not necessarily be as tough on certain Chinese corporate actors. And the more of these type of edicts that come out, the more difficult it is for the Biden administration to roll them back. It's also important to note that U.S. China policy is one of the rare, maybe the only area of real bipartisan accord in the Senate. So Trump has support from a lot of Democrats on this, and Biden will almost certainly have support for a lot of Republicans on policies that are more critical of Beijing and the party.
All right, Isaac Stonefish, thank you.
Thank you.